Good evening. Evening. And welcome to the inauguration of Michael Freedman as the 113th President of the National Press Club. My name is Gil Klein. I'm the Bureau Chief of the Gaylord Washington Bureau of the University of Oklahoma. Hey, boomer sooner, guys. Now, I was also the 1994 president of the club, but that's beside the point. I have known Mike Freedman for a long time, and this is the nut graph that you need to know about him. He is one of the few people you will ever meet who can conceive of a great idea and execute it. I've seen him do it time and time again. Mike comes to the job as a great journalist and journalism educator. He has been managing editor of the broadcast division of United Press International. He was the general manager of CBS Radio Network News. What you will learn about Mike is that he loves baseball. He loves his wife, Renee, and his family. He loves radio, and he loves working with students to create the next generation of journalists. He has been teaching journalism at George Washington University for nearly 20 years, and he is now journalist in residence at the University of Maryland Global Campus. That's here for the Global Campus. Now, I met Mike in 1994. I had run for the club president on the platform of creating a regular television program that examined the news media. The only problem was I had no idea how to do it. So where would I get the money? Where would I get a moderator of sufficient renown to make it work? That's when Jan Duplain, who is here tonight, introduced me to Mike Freedman, who was working with George Washington University at the time. GW had the legendary CBS newsman Marvin Kalb, and GW President Stephen Trachtenberg asked Mike to create a television program, and here's $100,000 to do it. Mike needed a venue. To say the least, it was a match made in heaven. Our new president just loves radio. He even collects antique radios. Mike told me his affinity for radios goes back to when he was 7 years old. He received a transistor radio as a birthday gift. Every night, he would hide it under his pillow and listen to his beloved Detroit Tiger games and far-off stations. And because of that, he went into journalism as a radio sportscaster and newsman in Detroit. Now, through the magic of the National Press Club, I bring back to life that same radio that Mike hid under his pillow. Shazam! A 1961 Bell Labs Future 3-transistor radio. This magic radio can recreate the voices of great broadcasters. Let's see if we can find Edward R. Murrow.
This is Trafalgar Square. The noise that you hear at the moment is the sound of the air raid siren. I'm standing here just on the steps of St. Martin's in the Fields.
That's pretty good. How about Walter Cronkite?
On July 20th, 1969, American astronaut Neil Armstrong climbed out of the lunar module Eagle and walked on the moon, the first human being ever to set foot on that surface.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
And how about Charlie Slows, You never heard of him? Oh, but you will after you hear this.
Swing and a miss! Swing and a miss! Swing and a miss! And a World Series Game 7 winning Curly W is in the books. The celebration is on. The Washington Nationals are the world champions.
Now that's a magic radio. We've got a great program lined up for you this evening, and as we prepare to have dinner, I'd like to acknowledge past presidents of the National Press Club joining us this evening. As anyone who's been president of this august institution knows, you stand on the shoulders of all of the past presidents, 112 of them going back to Bill Spurgeon in 1908. Each one volunteered their time and talents to make this club what it is today. Jeff Ballou, 2017. Thomas Burr, 2016. Myron Belkine, 2014. Angela Greiling-Keene, 2013. Teresa Werner, 2012. Mark Hamrick, 2011. Dinah Linewan Leger, 2009. Jonathan Salant, 2006. Rick Dunham, 2005. Tammy Lytle, 2003. Richard Ryan, 2001. Mark Harbrecht, 1998. And the granddaddy of us all, Frank Okafor, 1978. All of you, please rise. Okay. Now, may I ask all of the current members of the National Press Club Board of Governors to stand and be recognized. All right. And could we have a nice hand for those who served tonight's inaugural planning committee? This evening could not be possible without the support of our wonderful sponsor and partners. We greatly appreciate their support. From Bloomberg Philanthropies, University of Maryland Global Campus, the George Washington University, Ethics and Excellence in Journalism Foundation, Entercom, the Associated Press, CBS Radio Network, CNN, Topps, the baseball card company, and special thanks to the Washington Post, the Washington Nationals racing president, Teddy Roosevelt, who you all got to meet. What you don't know is that Teddy Roosevelt, the original, that visited the club in 1910, and it's a great story. I recommend I'll tell you about it someday. Yes, in the book. Rose Anderson, the New York Festival's Radio Awards, thanks to one and all. Now, ladies and gentlemen, please enjoy the dinner, and we will be back shortly. Ladies and gentlemen, as we sip our coffee, eat the dessert, the deals are being made left and right here. My God, there's news. People are running to the telephones. We don't do that anymore, do we? So we're back here for our program tonight. And the first thing we want to do is let's more formally meet Mr. Mike Freedman.
If you're fortunate enough to have a long career in journalism, a lot of youthful dreams come true. You get to work with some good people doing good things. Walter Cronkite.
This is CBS News Special Report, a conversation with the astronauts. I'm correspondent Walter Cronkite in Houston.
Incidentally, before time gets away from us here, I want to wish you a very happy birthday. I understand that's your birthday, Walter. Is that correct?
Well, thank you very much. I didn't expect birthday greetings from outer space. And that's the way it is, Wednesday, November 4th, 1998. This is Walter Cronkite for CBS News in Houston.
Ernie Harwell.
All right, Mike Freedman of the Detroit Tigers, okay?
So proud.
Allie Reynolds is on the mound for the Yankees.
I know where I'm going.
Count 2-2 on the mic. Here's the look in by Reynolds. He gets a sign from Berra. Here's the set. Here's the pitch. Ooh, strike called. He stood there like the house by the side of the road and watched it go by.
Robert Trout. Howard K. Smith. Dan Rather. Richard C. Hottelet.
So we've talked about the fact that you were taken prisoner by the Nazis. Later in the war, your plane is shot down, and you had to parachute to safety. In today's world, either one of those would have resulted in a book, maybe a movie, a speaking tour. How did you think of those adventures, experiences, and close calls?
Well, anything you survive is fun, and there it was. There wasn't any. I told my story, and that was it.
Bob Schieffer. Charles Osgood. Andy Rooney.
I have seen a list that includes landing on the moon as one of the single most important. I thought it was the most overrated adventure of the century. I mean, it's one big dead rock up there, and we got to it. End of story.
Tony Bennett.
Don't touch that dial. This is Tony Bennett, and we're back with American Jazz from the George Washington University.
And Marvin Cowell.
Hello, and welcome to the National Press Club and to another edition of the Kalb Report. I'm Marvin Kalb. In our program tonight, 45 Words, a conversation about the First Amendment with Supreme Court Justices Antonin Scalia and Ruth Bader Ginsburg.
If you're really fortunate, you get to combine the craft of journalism with the art and science of teaching. A reporter who's able to pay it forward to the next generation of journalists is a blessed creature.
My goal in teaching is to give you the equivalent of books that you keep on the shelf for the rest of your life.
Unforgettable.
And if you're truly blessed, you get to enjoy it all with a love and supportive family.
Unforgettable, though near or far.
On behalf of your friends and colleagues, congratulations, Mike, and all the best as you assume this important role at this important time for journalism and our democracy.
Never before has someone been more unforgettable in every way.
So the video here, our thanks to CBS News correspondent Sam Litzinger and to Lindsay Underwood, Scott Graham, and Tina Creek for producing that video. Next, we go back to the first voice you heard on Mike's Magic Radio. Edward R. Murrow literally invented broadcast news with CBS, and he and his extraordinary team reported from across Europe during World War II. And he spoke here at this podium in 1961 when he was director of the United States Information Agency. Mike Freedman has become something of a scholar on Murrow. So it's only fitting that our first speaker this evening is Edward R. Murrow's son, Casey Murrow. Like his parents, Casey is an educator and director of Synergy. It says Synergy, Learning in Vermont, and he and Mike have become good friends over the years. And Casey has guest lectured many of Mike's classes. Casey Murrow, the podium is yours.
Thank you all. Our daughter Jenna and I are proud to be here to honor Mike and Mike's election to head the National Press Club and to represent the Murrow family. In his many roles, Mike has been a strong supporter of the Murrow legacy and the ideals that my dad represented. My problem this evening was how could I relate this to today and to Mike, to his concerns about journalism, to Mike's concerns about journalism, and issues about press freedom and journalistic independence. My mother, who is no longer living, solved my problem by writing in her own hand a conversation between Janet and Ed, which we've dated to 1948, a mere 72 years ago. Please note that I said written in her own hand, which means I did not make it up. Mom called this ancient history, which may have been an error on her part. She began by reminding us that they lived in London from 1937 to 1946. Then she quoted my dad. You know, you are probably going to see many of the same things happening in the States as we saw in Germany in the 30s. Surely not, said my mother. In the United States? I could hear her saying this. Ed replied, well, with the country faced by a possible communist threat, it will be easy to build on the fears of some people. Totalitarianism thrives on this situation. Individual liberties, the right to say, read, write, or think, these are our precious rights and have to be protected. I think, this is Ed again, I think we're going to have to do just that. Of course, protecting these rights goes on forever, doesn't it? I saw this just 3 days ago in a David Ignatius piece in the Post. He quotes a Tehran Journalists Association statement. What endangers this society right now is not missiles and military attacks, but a lack of a free media. Thank you. Thank you, and many good wishes to Mike and to the National Press Club.
Stay here for just a second. All right. Now, before you leave, Casey, thank you so much for that. I want to tell you that we have something for you. Casey Murrow, for all you do to help new generations learn about journalistic integrity and all that your father stood for, it is my pleasure, on behalf of Mike Freedman and the Board of Governors, to announce that you are now an honorary member of the National Press Club with all those rights and privileges. And I would hand you your membership card here, but they didn't give me it. It's here somewhere. Thank you very much. There's always something. Now it is my pleasure to introduce another longtime friend of Mike's and a person who represents leadership in journalism today, the Senior Vice President and Washington Bureau Chief of CNN, Mr. Sam Feist.
Thank you, Gil, and thank you, Casey. I really appreciate your words and your mother's words. Your father, Casey, has an awful lot to do with both me and Mike Freedman getting into the news business, and even more to do with setting the high standards that we strive to live up to every day in journalism. I have a strange connection to the Murrow family, which I feel also connects me with Mike. I believe, and you may know differently, I believe I am the only person in the world with a marble bust of Edward R. Murrow in his backyard. It is true. It's a little strange. It's true, and if you want an explanation, I'll talk to you after dinner, because this is really an evening about Mike, but we share that. I always feel like Edward R. Murrow connects me to Mike Freedman. In the very first conversation I had with Mike, I learned that Edward R. Murrow was our shared North Star in journalism. I got to know Mike very well in the 2000s, that's what we call it, right? The 2000s, just after I was named producer of CNN's Crossfire program. One of the first things I did after getting that job was to call Mike to have lunch. And it was during that lunch that we discussed this crazy idea of producing Crossfire from the George Washington University live every day. Mike, of course, at the time was a professor and the vice president of communication at the George Washington University. By the end of that lunch, we had a plan, and by the end of that month, we had a signed contract. Now, for any of you who work in universities, you know that what I just described is next to impossible. A major university usually works at a snail's pace, and we were working at the speed of a broadcast network. But it was because of Mike that we were able to do it. It was an enormous lift. Mike willed that partnership into being, and for years, CNN produced that program from George Washington University, and that project, that program, birthed scores of CNN careers that continue on today. It also birthed what I consider a lifelong friendship with Mike Freedman. Mike is an outstanding educator. He's a great administrator, a fabulous producer, but if there's a single word I could use to describe Mike Freedman, it is, of course, journalist. Journalism is at the root of everything Mike's passionate about, and that was on display just yesterday. You may have heard that on Thursday of this week, a CNN correspondent named Manu Raju was up on Capitol Hill doing what Capitol Hill reporters do, and that's asking questions of members of Congress. Manu asked Senator Martha McSally if she plans to vote for witnesses in the impeachment trial, pretty much the most important question that's out there right now to ask United States senators. She responded to Manu's question, asked very politely with these words, quote, "I'm not going to answer. You're a partisan hack." And then she walked away. She then proceeded to fundraise off of that moment and then repeat her comment about Manu on Fox News that night. In Mike Freedman's very first public act as the president of the National Press Club, he put out this statement, quote, "Manu Raju is a consummate professional who is respected by his journalistic peers and the people who he covers. Stating the contrary is factually and ethically wrong." And in that moment, thank you. And in that moment, the National Press Club, with its new president, Michael Freedman, became the first journalism organization to go out publicly and defend Manu Raju. Others followed later yesterday. Thank you, Mike. We're all grateful. Casey has joined many esteemed journalists and esteemed figures in speaking to Mike's journalism class. It is a great honor. It has been a great honor for me to speak to Mike's journalism class because the roster of speakers is remarkable in every way. I've been honored to join Mike's class for at least the last decade. One of my favorite quotes about journalism comes from another Freedman class speaker. In fact, he was, I think, the last of the Murrow boys. You saw him in the video. Dick Hotlet's advice for journalists, as shared by Mike, was, quote, "Play it straight. Don't tell people what you think. Don't tell people what you feel. Just tell people what you know," end quote. There is absolutely no better advice from a journalist. And you see, Casey, your father's influence through his protégés and kept alive by Mike Freedman has now been passed along to another generation of journalists, people like me and people like Mike's students who are actually here in this room. I know a number of you may have been honored to speak at Mike Freedman's class, and you know that there is a tradition that Mike has of giving a token of appreciation for those taking the time to speak. Among my treasured possessions is one of those tokens of appreciation. It's a Time magazine cover of Edward R. Murrow, signed by none other than Edward R. Murrow that Mike shared with me, and I cherish it. So in that tradition, I thought I would end with a couple of token gifts of my own. Mike, as some of you may know, is known to be a bit of a collector. I don't know, Renee, if you want to verify that, if that's okay. I went into the CNN vault and have now recovered the very last artifacts from the show called Crossfire. And I can think of no person more deserving than Mike Freedman. So I'm going to show you them right here. Mike, you can stay. Excuse me. Okay, so I have my artifact bag. First, this is a Crossfire pillow because nothing says rest and relaxation more than Crossfire. This is a set of Crossfire shot glasses because we were both driven to drink multiple times getting that project off the ground. This is the very last Crossfire t-shirt. Please wear it with great pride. And finally, because you are indeed a history buff, this is the very first mug from the Crossfire desk that was hosted by none other than Patrick Buchanan and the great journalist Tom Braden, and this is their mug. With that, Mike, Mr. President, our National Press Club could not be in better hands, and this journalist right here could not be happier. Congratulations.
Whew. Now, thank you, Sam. Thank you so much for all of that. What a wonderful presentation for Mike. And our next speaker joined the Kalb Report as a student volunteer at GW. Today, she is senior producer of the series, the Kalb Report, and a vice president of the University of Maryland Global Campus, Ms. Heather Nutt.
Thank you, Gil, and good evening, everyone. 25 years ago, when I was a sophomore in college at George Washington University, my friend Ellen from Spanish class invited me to go off campus to attend an event. I remember walking into the National Press Club for the first time, seeing the photos on the wall, and entering this very ballroom to join the audience for the Kalb Report. I was captivated by both the content and the production of that evening's forum. At one point, my friend, sensing how impressed I was, leaned over to me, pointed in Mike Freedman's direction, and said, "That's the executive producer. You should go talk to that guy." I took her advice that evening, and after the program, I went over to talk to that guy. It was one of the best decisions I ever made. My friendship with Mike began that evening. He invited me to help his team behind the scenes as a student volunteer for the next Kalb Report and for several other special events. As I finished school and embarked on my professional career, Mike was a trusted mentor. We remained in touch when his career took him to CBS and mine to CNN. And several years later, when the CNN political debate program Crossfire, which was known within Washington for showcasing that which divides us, it actually brought Mike and I together again. Mike hired me to serve as coordinating producer for the CNN-GW partnership, working closely with the friend you just met, Sam Feist, another mentor and friend. The partnership resulted in 800 live television programs before 100,000 studio audience members, and it brought unprecedented visibility to the university. But what Mike cared about most from the CNN project was ensuring that our students were learning from this experience. Every afternoon, we transformed one of our academic buildings into a live television learning laboratory. Students served as interns and shadowed CNN producers. Students ran the front of house operations for the audience. They staffed the will call booth, ushered guests to seats, assisted with lighting, and even ran the house audio, which with Mike, you know, is a lot of trust. He cares about the audio. Mike even convinced Sam and me to serve as adjunct professors and teach a class together for these students on the history of public affairs television programs. Mike's vision and his enthusiasm were inspiring. And as Sam said, so many of our students moved on to careers in media as a result of their Crossfire student experiences, fulfilling exactly what Mike envisioned. And the devotion Mike shows his students is the same care and attentiveness that he shows his staff. When Mike went on to build a Global Media Institute for GW and then created an Office of Communications for University of Maryland Global Campus, he invited me to join him. We have now been through 3 office moves, and we've built 3 new operations together. I've learned a lot from that experience, those experiences, and in each case, he said the most important thing we could do was to bring together a great team. Bob Ludwig, Dick Golden, Kat Bugg, Megan Calnan, Lindsay Underwood, Brian Kane, who got the job because he was able to remove a quarter from a gumball machine that Mike got stuck. He's our lifelong web editor for the Kalb Report. Chip Casano and Avi Feinberg have been the very best colleagues we could have assembled. Mike sets the bar high and expects great things from each of us. Around his table, every voice counts, every idea matters, every person makes a difference. You are never alone, he always has your back, and he makes everyone around him feel special. And tonight is his special moment. The National Press Club is so fortunate to have Mike as president. He has a deep love and appreciation for both the history and the practice of journalism that will guide his tenure. Wherever he goes, he creates a feeling of team, of community, of family. Knowing Mike is gaining a friend for life. And tonight, I'm really proud of that guy who I met 25 years ago in this room. Congratulations, my friend. I hope you enjoy every minute of this special assignment. Thank you.
Thank you, Heather. And we've worked together for many years, and it's been terrific, because whenever Heather walks into the room, everything is going to work out fine. Next is the person who hired Mike at CBS News, and a radio legend in his own right. Please welcome the former CBS Radio Network News Vice President, Harvey Nagler.
Thank you, Gil, for saying it exactly the way I wrote it. I'm honored to toast Mike tonight. I've known him for nearly 4 decades, and some of that friendship began back in the early 1980s when we were both on the UPI advisory board. At that time, we formed a little partnership to buy UPI. Our group offered $1 million. And I don't know if any of you here in the room remember Mario Vasquez Rania. Rania bought UPI because he made a bid of $6 million. And unfortunately, 3 years later, the venture went belly up. And I'm convinced that if Mike would have found a way to make UPI viable, and it still would have been around today if Mike had been successful in his bid. Some of the most memorable times that I've had in journalism was when Mike and I worked together at CBS. He, more than any individual, and when I say individual, I mean the whole news organization, radio and television, that Mike exemplified, he cherished the golden era of CBS News. You heard how he reunited the Murrow Boys. Not mentioned tonight was how Mike was devoted to the CBS World News Roundup, which, as some of you know, is the longest running radio broadcast in history. That program started in March of 1938 with a live report from Vienna when Hitler invaded Austria. And as I'm sure you've heard by now, there is a major downside to Mike's devotion to radio. As you've also heard, Renee constantly complains about all that memorabilia, all the radios, all the mementos he's acquired through the years that clutter their house. And Sam, I hope you didn't cause a rift in that marriage tonight with even more memorabilia. Gil mentioned two of Mike's characteristics. I would add a third to the area of expertise that Mike has: creativity, organization, and being a big picture thinker, a futurist, as we would say in today's language. Mike is good, great at all three, particularly anticipating changes and thinking of significant new ventures. As an example, Mike was elected to the presidency of the Press Club only 1 month ago. But 8 months ago, he started conversations with the Commission on Presidential Debates. Now, I have some breaking news for you, but please don't tell anybody, because it hasn't been officially announced. But Mike has partnered with the Commission, so this year, the National Press Club will be the host site for all of their events, such as news conferences. And that's just one example of how Mike thinks in the future and projects and thinks what's good for the organization. And if you didn't know by now, Mike is one of the sweetest, nicest individuals you would ever want to know. When asked about the friendships he made in New York, his answer was the doorman and Tony Bennett. And that gives you some insight into Mike as an individual. He talks and befriends everyone. There's no doubt in my mind that aside from Renee and the children and the grandchildren, as you've heard, journalism is his #1 love. He lives and he breathes it, and that's why the National Press Club is so lucky to have him. There's an old saying, the future belongs to those who understand it. I can't think of anyone who embodies that saying more than our own Mike Freedman. Congratulations, Mike.
Thank you, Harvey. Next up are two people who consider Mike a father figure, in part because he is, in fact, their father. Please welcome Mike and Renee's sons, University of Delaware faculty member and psychologist, Dr. Brian Freedman, and journalist and National Press Club member, Danny Freedman. I would never do this. I would never have my children up here.
It is a risky request. Hi, everyone, and welcome. As Gil mentioned, we're Mike's sons, Brian and Danny Freedman. We'd actually like to start by raising a glass to our dad. Please join us. He's an incredible dad, and from what we've all heard tonight, a person who is revered in his field as a journalist, educator, collaborator, coworker, leader, and friend. He's also the only guy who could turn his inauguration into what kind of feels like a Washington Nationals birthday party. To our dad, cheers and l'chaim.
We are so, is this one working? Is this thing on? We are so thrilled to be here for this celebration. The presidency of the National Press Club is really the pinnacle for a guy for whom journalism isn't just a career or a skill set, it's really a way of life. And as a family, we've certainly felt its influence growing up.
In fact, our phone calls at the end of a school day, or even just this past week, tend to follow the inverted pyramid. Sometimes he'd even ask, "What's the headline?" or accuse us of bearing the lead if small talk ended up being followed by any morsel of news. And we didn't simply hang on for a second, we were actually asked to stand by.
we grew up surrounded by mellifluous basso voices. Some of them are in the audience tonight. And by microphones and radios, big ones capable of picking up Germany and little ones that adorn the shelves. And we grew up with long car rides where AM radio crackled in the background for hours, sometimes more static than words. And we were the only kids in generations, or ever, who knew the name of the dog in the Victor Talking Machines logo and how to change a phonograph needle.
Even at Passover, the religious text we used to guide the Seder asked people at the table to pretend that they're covering the Jews' exodus from Egypt and to please describe what they saw. Part of what makes our dad unique, though, is that his passion for journalism is woven in with a natural sense of loyalty and integrity and an appreciation of history. Growing up, seeing our dad's work ethic was a part of daily life. In Detroit, we'd often listen to him on the radio on the way to school. And when tornado sirens whirred, we would head to the basement and switch on the radio, and he would head into work.
You don't need to know him long to know, to realize his appreciation and love of tradition and nostalgia, the way he collects from the past to help bring meaning to the present. For us, on the one hand, that meant that the only phone in our basement was a payphone from the 1920s. It was the kind where where one earpiece goes to your ear and a separate piece is for shouting, "Operator, operator!" But things like that also offered us context where there might have been none otherwise, and an appreciation for the evolution of everyday things. In whatever he does, he always seems to give 150%. It's like there's nothing less, there's no low setting.
Of course, little of this would have happened without our mom, Renee. She keeps us all grounded and sane. And together, she and our dad are a 1-2 punch of heart, humility, and reverence that's allowed them to forge relationships with heroes like Abba Eban, Marvin Kalb, Ernie Harwell, Walter Cronkite, and Tony Bennett. They remind us and model for us the importance of family and community and going after dreams. We're both so grateful for having such incredible parents.
So Mazel Tov, Dad. We are so proud of you, and we love you, and we look forward to all the great things you're going to do this year.
And thanks to Danny and Brian. Whoa, whew. Now, among Mike's most cherished experiences was his work with Walter Cronkite, including their interview with astronaut John Glenn, which, by the way, marked the last time Walter Cronkite ever offered his signature close on CBS. To represent Walter Cronkite this evening, here is his former Chief of Staff, Marlene Adler. Welcome, Marlene.
You have me following Danny and Brian. Thank you. I've known Mike Freedman for more years than I'm going to admit to tonight. But I am going to reveal something that for Renee and many of you will come as no surprise. Mike's just a boy who doesn't say no. We met as colleagues at CBS. I was Chief of Staff to Walter Cronkite a decade after he stepped down from the anchor desk, and Mike became an integral part of CBS News Radio. Though Walter was not a presence on CBS television at the time, Mike saw to it, a steadfast champion of the network's legacy, saw to it that Walter continued to be a voice for CBS. Mike crafted the exquisite radio series Walter Cronkite's Postscripts to the 20th Century, and also included him on the venerated Kalb Report from time to time. Beyond that, his support was unfailing. After Walter passed, I relied often on Mike's invaluable counsel and influence to help me entice a significant interview or a prop that would give authenticity to one of my documentaries. I certainly am not going to complain about the memorabilia that he saved, because he actually had a UP wire machine stored in his shed that, with a little tinkering, came clacking back to life 50 years later to relay the news that JFK had been shot. Thank you. His respect, admiration, and loyalty to Walter were matched only by Walter's for him. If Walter felt privileged about any aspect of his career, it would be the unparalleled training he received as a print journalist. That was the calibration by which he deemed Mike a newsman's newsman. And tonight is an affirmation of that truth. I have no doubt that Walter's looking down from his perch, beaming with pride that his trusted colleague and friend is now at the helm of one of his beloved institutions. And here I stand, humbled among you, channeling that love, but heaping my own enormous esteem on top. I am proud beyond measure that I can call myself a friend of my favorite living defender of the free press and the standard of journalistic ethics that engenders trust and will inspire the next generation of esteemed journalists. Walter once remarked that success is more permanent when you achieve it without destroying your principles, and that no institution was more critical of itself than the press. Never was it more critical than now to have a journalist of unimpeachable values guiding this august body of the Fourth Estate in steadfast fulfillment of the role envisioned and protected by our founding fathers. I congratulate the National Press Club on the selection of its 113th president, whose visionary leadership will assuredly increase the power and elevate the stature of our press and help to move our nation forward. Walter Cronkite summed it up perfectly when he said, freedom of the press is not just important to democracy, it is democracy. Congratulations, Mike, and thank you for this honor. And that's my 30.
Now, to complete the lineage, from the founder of Radio News, Edward R. Murrow, to Walter Cronkite, to Mike Freedman, we have the man who knew and worked with all of them, Mr. Marvin Kalb. Marvin was the last correspondent personally hired by Edward R. Murrow. For years, he reported from the State Department and around the world for CBS Evening News with Walter Cronkite. And since 1994, Marvin and Mike have worked hand in glove to create 100 productions of the public broadcasting series, The Kalb Report, here at the National Press Club. So we close that circle with remarks by Marvin, who will then swear in as the 113th president of the National Press Club. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Marvin Kalb.
Gil, you read that very well. If God had stage managed the inauguration of Mike Freedman as the 113th president of the National Press Club, he'd have had another speaker up here instead of me. The other guy was tall, but he was brave, handsome, with a record of professional accomplishment unlikely ever to be duplicated. He was, in his time and beyond, the most famous journalist in the world for his coverage of World War II, his creation of broadcast news, his legacy of integrity, decency,
and responsibility, and finally, his historic dismantling of the junior senator from Wisconsin, Joseph McCarthy. That other speaker obviously should have been Edward R. Murrow, and God, as stage manager, should have arranged for him to be here tonight. I mean, why not? What else did Murrow have to do? But Murrow is not here because, and I hope you listen carefully, he already is here. You've heard it and seen it in so many different ways. Casey Murrow, his son, here, proudly carrying on his father's standards, but in the field of education. The person sitting to your right or left was probably influenced by Murrow in some way. He might have received a Murrow Fellowship while in college. This institution, the National Press Club, thrives every hour of every day because it is suffused in the incomparable legacy and traditions of this exceptional journalist, in the rock-bottom belief that open democratic governance depends ultimately upon a free press. Let me take this one step further. Your substitute speaker, that's me, was the last reporter Murrow personally hired at CBS in 1957. That's 62 years ago. In addition to my brother Bernie, Murrow was the one person who inspired almost every step I have ever taken in this business. I was the CBS Moscow correspondent because Murrow wanted CBS to have a Russian speaker there, someone familiar with the Soviet capital, somebody familiar with Russian history. Many, many years later, when it came time to name my chair at Harvard, with pride and a sense of history, I called it the Edward R. Murrow Professorship of Press and Public Policy. And because it's Harvard with all of its money and stipends, a Murrow Professorship will always be there. And students 100 years from now will be listening to the Murrow Professor talk about the continuing wonders of a free press in a democracy. But tonight, we gather here for the very specific purpose of honoring Mike Freedman, a very special man, who has spent much of his own life studying that other very special man, Murrow's books, his broadcasts, his speeches. As you've already heard, Mike's journalism courses are studied testaments to the life and times of Edward R. Murrow. Mike's students learn from the master of journalistic fundamentals. I mean, put aside all of the technological stuff for a minute and stick to what's important about journalism. The Murrow understanding of journalism, in my sense, is first, the fearless search for truth. Second, the determination to be fair in the presentation of the story. And third, the willingness to wait another hour or even another day for confirmation of a fact so that when you broadcast it, you know it is true. All in all, the personal responsibility a reporter should feel to his reader or viewer is to provide the unsullied foundational underpinning of fact and observation storytelling at its best. Linked then, if necessary, to analysis and commentary, but the commentary always labeled as such. All of this, by the way, is to serve a simple purpose: to inform and educate the public, a simple yet fundamental responsibility in a democracy. Once in this country, a responsibility that was taken for granted, no longer. Murrow in his day had to worry first about Hitler and then about McCarthy. We in our day have our own worry: the Trumpian challenge to a free press and ultimately to the survival of our democracy. This year, with impeachment, a general election, and the possibility of war on the near horizon, the National Press Club has a rather awesome menu of stories and responsibilities, and I confess to you, I feel absolutely giddy about the prospect of Mike Freedman and the presidency of this club at this time. The National Press Club has always played a leading role in the struggle to maintain a free and independent press. We all know that, we all accept that, but now it has to do more. The times demand that. And you have come upon the right person. Mike Freedman is the leader for our time. I know Mike as a friend and as a journalist. As a friend, he is incomparable. As a journalist, equally so. At its heart, I recognize and respect Mike's fierce dedication to a free and independent press, and then to the connection between a free press and a free and open society. One is intimately linked to the other. Freedom of the press, freedom for us all. That is not a slogan, by the way. In my judgment, that is the challenge for our times. Good luck, Mike.
This is when we swear in the new president, I believe. Mr. Mike Freedman, will you please come on up here? You all set for this?
I'm supposed to go over here. And you may need to go over here.
Mike.
You're over here.
Okey doke. Mike, please raise your right hand and place your left hand on this set of credentials assigned to Edward R. Murrow as he covered World War II. Mike, a series of questions. Your answer, please, in only 2 words. Do you solemnly swear that as the National Press Club president, you will uphold the journalistic standards created by Edwin R. Murrow?
I do.
Do you promise to strengthen the National Press Club for the benefit of its members?
I do.
Do you pledge to fight vigorously for the protection of journalists everywhere and to work to defend freedom of the press worldwide?
I do.
And perhaps most important, Mike, do you promise to be generous with your Washington Nationals season tickets? And take me to the opening day in April?
I do.
In that case, having answered in the affirmative to all of these questions, I now declare you President of the National Press Club.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, as is tradition, to offer a toast to the new president, ladies and gentlemen, please raise your glasses to the 113th president of the National Press Club, Mr. Mike Freedman. Here. Mr. President, the podium is yours.
Marlene, if you think it was hard following my sons, try following Marvin Kalb. Good evening, everyone, and thank you, Gil, for your beautiful toast, your wonderful and very creative emceeing of tonight's gala, for your longtime leadership of the National Press Club, and most important, for your friendship. We've already heard much this evening about Ed Murrow, and while many of his quotes serve to strengthen our resolve as journalists, I'm reminded after hearing so many very kind words of a different Murrow quote. Just because your voice reaches halfway around the world doesn't mean you are wiser than when it reached only to the end of the bar. With that in mind, let me offer humble and heartfelt thanks to Casey Murrow, Marlene Adler, Sam Feist, Harvey Nagler, my sons Brian and Danny, Gil Klein, Heather Date, and Marvin Kalb for their gracious remarks. And let me thank my friend, CBS News correspondent Sam Litzinger, for his beautiful narration of that video. During our time together at CBS, Sam and I embarked on a series of interviews with American originals. Among them was the great big band leader, Artie Shaw. When asked about his best teachers, Artie Shaw, who was 90 at the time, said, "My best teacher was whoever was sitting next to me on the bandstand on any given night." I have had the great good fortune of collaborating and learning from a lot of best teachers. My wife Renee and our family have taught me the meaning of unconditional love. I learned the fundamentals of broadcasting and journalism during 15 years in Detroit radio. I learned the selflessness of pure reporting at United Press International. And I learned that boyhood dreams can come true working with the people who invented and then perfected broadcast news at CBS. At George Washington University, I've had the privilege of teaching journalism for the past 19 years. And I can assure you that I have learned as much from my students as they could ever have learned from me. I also learned the art of managing people from my president there, Stephen Trachtenberg, who taught me to surround myself with the best and brightest in their areas of expertise and then empower and protect them. At University of Maryland Global Campus, I have learned more than ever before about creative, collaborative thinking, and I've done so with colleagues who are also among my closest friends, and with the support of a president, Javier Mieres, who cares deeply about our democracy and the press. And here at the National Press Club since 1994, I have had the opportunity to gather with colleagues and friends in good fun and mutual respect with the shared belief in the mission of our profession. This is home. And what an honor it is to be entrusted with the leadership of this vital organization that has served as a beacon for journalists for more than a century. At the National Press Club, we protect press freedom. We protect reporters around the world, and today we must also protect the reputation of journalism. We can accomplish this through ethics and excellence within the profession, the education of the next generation of journalists, and news literacy for the general public. In each case, actions speak far louder than words. Deborah Tice and Jason Rezaian are two people we can all learn from. Deborah, who is with us tonight, is the mom of Austin Tice, a U.S. Marine and freelance journalist who has been imprisoned in Syria since 2012. Deborah and her husband Mark have never given up hope of gaining Austin's release, nor should they. 2 years ago, the National Press Club took up their cause, initiating nationwide events, forums, and private meetings to raise public awareness, influence national leaders, and ultimately win this young man's release. Tonight, we welcome Deborah Tice, and we say to you, Deborah, the National Press Club and its Journalism Institute are with you until we bring your son and our journalistic colleague safely home. Jason Rezaian is a Washington Post reporter who spent 544 days in captivity in Iran. The National Press Club was proud to work closely with his family, with the Washington Post, executive editor Marty Baron, who is with us tonight, and others, in the effort that resulted in his release 4 years ago this weekend. Our hope is that next year, on this night, Austin Tice will be sitting next to Jason Rezaian in this room. In May of 1961, President John F. Kennedy told Congress, "I believe that this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal before this decade is out of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the Earth." Then, in an address at Rice University in September of 1962, the President shared his most inspiring words about space exploration. "We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they're easy, but because they are hard, because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills, because that challenge is one we are willing to accept, one we are unwilling to postpone, and one in which we intend to win." As we know, in July of 1969, astronauts Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins successfully met President Kennedy's challenge. 50 years later, in April of 2019, just 8 months ago, 88-year-old Michael Collins joined us on the Kalb Report on this stage. The reclusive Collins accepted the interview, we were told by his daughters, for 3 reasons: Marvin Kalb, our links to Walter Cronkite and coverage of the space program, and because the interview would be conducted at the National Press Club. In the program, Michael Collins said his view of Earth while orbiting the moon gave him a new appreciation of home. "I don't know why," he said, "but I felt that I was looking at something fragile. Earth is something we all enjoy without thinking about it. I felt like I was seeing something for the first time." And before the program ended, he offered pointed words for anyone who would call the press the enemy of the people. "The enemy, my ass," he said. Michael Collins said, "The enemy, the press, is not our enemy, it is our salvation, and I thank you for it." The challenges that we face as journalists today are bigger than any one of us. They are bigger than the National Press Club. The work we do is for the greater good, and we do it not because it's easy, but because it's hard, because it serves to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills, because that challenge is one that we are willing to accept and one we cannot postpone. This is a singular moment, and it belongs to all of us. We stand on the shoulders of those who came before us and some who are in this room tonight. We are privileged to have this opportunity to take the lessons learned from Ed Murrow, from Walter Cronkite, from Marvin Kalb, from Dorothy Gilliam, from Marty Baron, from Dean Baquet, from Gwen Ifill, from Cokie Roberts, from Jason Rezaian, and from Austin Tice, and to apply them in meeting the challenges of today and tomorrow. Yes, it's about ethics and excellence in journalism. It's also about having the courage of your convictions and making a difference. In challenging his peers and network executives, Ed Murrow once said of television, "This instrument can teach, it can illuminate, it can even inspire, but it can do so only to the extent that humans are determined to use it to those ends. Otherwise, it's nothing but wires and lights in a box." There is a great and perhaps decisive battle to be fought against ignorance, intolerance, and indifference. This weapon of television could be useful. In today's digital world, we have more information at our fingertips than perhaps even Ed Murrow could have imagined. At the same time, readers, listeners, and viewers on all platforms are seeking sources they can trust. The National Press Club is an indispensable platform to educate, to inspire, to empower, and to protect. I ask tonight that we all join together to ensure we are using it to those ends. I thank you for your commitment and dedication to the National Press Club, to press freedom, to ethics and excellence in journalism, and to this noble experiment we all cherish called democracy. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us tonight. The party is certainly not over, but first we should have a nice round of applause for the wonderful staff of the National Press Club. And now the celebration continues in the Holman Lounge with the music of Eric Felton and where'd it go? Eric Felton, yes, of course, the Eric Felton Quartet, and as both Ed Murrow and Marvin Kalb have said, good night and good luck.